Before we continue, we'd love for you to subscribe to the Dip Dive podcast channel. Your support helps us grow and create even better content just for you. Thanks for being part of our journey. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle something that I think a lot of us can relate to, and that is surviving group vacations. I think, everyone loves to travel. But when you add in a bunch of other people, it can definitely get a little complicated. So we've got a ton of great resources from you listeners about this. And maybe you've got a big trip coming up with friends or family. So we're going to go deep into everything from the planning stages to the airport to all those little conflicts that can pop up along the way.
Yeah, you know what I find fascinating is that a lot of these survival guides that are out there, they treat group travel almost like it's this wilderness expedition. It's not just about navigating the external obstacles like your flights and hotels, but also the complex social dynamics of a group, under pressure.
Totally. And it starts even before you even leave the house. Like, who hasn't encountered that one friend who's got the super detailed itinerary planned down to the minute,
Yeah.
One of our listeners, Kelsey, shared a story about a trip to Italy with a friend who had every single second planned out.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The classic overplanner.
Yeah.
It's funny because Kelsey's experience actually highlights this thing called psychological reactance. It's this idea that when people feel like their freedom is being threatened, they kind of instinctively rebel.
Right.
So in this case, that rigid itinerary,
Yeah.
it probably made Kelsey feel like she had no control. So she just ended up ditching the whole schedule altogether.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So maybe instead of meticulously planning every second, it's better to have a more collaborative approach,
Exactly. What if you did a pre-trip survey or something, where everyone could list their must-do activities and how fast or slow they want to go, and then, build in some free time. Or choose your own adventure days. I think that can really help prevent people from feeling like they're, boxed in.
That's such a good idea. It's like you're giving everyone a voice in the planning process, which, probably makes them feel more excited about the trip overall.
Right. And, speaking of potential stress points.
Yeah.
Let's not forget about the airport.
Oh, the airport. The place where everyone's anxiety just goes through the roof. And all those little travel quirks that we all have, they just become magnified. I think everyone has a story about some kind of airport drama. One listener, Sam, told us about this time his family almost missed their flight because his dad insisted on finding his lucky travel socks.
Ah, yes, the rituals we cling to. I think it's we're trying to grasp for some sense of control in these unpredictable situations. But Sam's story, I think it also touches on something really important about group travel, which is how do you manage all these different personalities and coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
When everyone's stressed out.
Yeah, it's true. Some people are totally fine under pressure.
Yeah.
And then others just completely fall apart. So how do you prevent those individual stress levels from, impacting the whole group?
Well, I think communication is key.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about setting realistic expectations. Going in knowing that delays are going to happen.
Yeah.
Things might get lost.
Right.
Maybe even those lucky socks kind of takes the pressure off trying to make everything perfect.
That's so true. And sometimes it's better to just laugh about those unexpected moments. It's instead of seeing it as a disaster, you're creating a funny story that you can tell later.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating shared spaces, let's talk about another classic group travel problem. The battle for the window seat.
Oh, the window seat, the ultimate symbol of travel privilege. One of our listeners, Priya, she shared her experience on a road trip where her friend just claimed the front seat for the entire trip just because they called dibs.
Yeah, Priya's story, I think it shows how even these seemingly small conflicts can actually reveal some deeper issues like, fairness and power dynamics within the group. I mean, dibs might work on a playground, but on a trip that's, several days long, it can definitely create some resentment.
Yeah, totally. So how do you prevent a window seat war from turning into a full-blown vacation feud?
Well, you could do a simple rotation system,
Yeah.
but I think it's also a chance to talk about the idea of equity versus equality. Everyone taking turns. It assumes that everybody has the same needs, but maybe someone's more prone to motion sickness, or they just genuinely like looking out the window more. So maybe having a conversation beforehand about those individual needs could lead to a fairer arrangement.
That's a really good point. It's not just about taking turns blindly, but, taking into account people's preferences. And you know what? I think a lot of people don't realize they're doing that. until it becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And those same principles apply when you're choosing activities.
Hmm.
One person considers an adventure, another person might see as like a total nightmare.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, we got a story from Jake who basically got peer pressured into bungee jumping with his friends. And let's just say it did not go well. And now his midair scream face is their group chat photo.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
Jake's story is a good reminder to respect people's boundaries
Hmm.
and their comfort zones. And it's not just about physical activities either. It applies to everything, like choosing museums or deciding how late you stay out.
Right. It's about recognizing that fun is subjective.
Yes,
And what might be exhilarating for one person could be totally terrifying for someone else.
exactly. And this kind of leads us to another potential minefield, the dreaded dinner debacle. Trying to find a restaurant that makes everyone happy and fits everyone's budget can feel like an impossible task.
It's so true. One of our listeners, Maya, she told us about her group spending so much time arguing about dinner that they ended up just eating gas station sandwiches.
No!
And then the irony is they argued about which gas station had the best sandwiches.
That's hilarious. It just shows how decision fatigue,
Yeah.
it could really lead to some bad decisions. But it also, I think, highlights how sometimes the perfect dining experience might be less important than just enjoying a meal together.
I love that. It's about prioritizing the company over the cuisine.
Exactly.
So how do you actually prevent that kind of dinner dilemma from ruining a whole evening?
Well, and instead of just leaving it to chance, what if you picked out a few restaurants beforehand? Maybe different price ranges, different types of food. That could save you a lot of time and stress. Another strategy is you could rotate who gets to choose each night, so everyone feels like they have a say.
Ooh, that's a great idea. It's like you're creating a system so you avoid those hanger-induced meltdowns.
Exactly. And speaking of potentially stressful shopping experiences, let's talk about souvenirs.
Oh, yes, souvenirs.
Those little shops, they seem harmless enough, but they can turn into a black hole of time and indecision, especially with a big group.
Oh, tell me about it. One of our listeners confessed to spending 3 hours in a souvenir shop and leaving empty-handed because they couldn't decide between a keychain and a mug.
Wow. You know, it's something we can all relate to, but it also makes you wonder, what is it about souvenir shopping that's so compelling? Is it about capturing memories or proving that you were there or finding that perfect gift? If we understand those motivations a little better, maybe it can help us make more conscious choices.
That's so true. Maybe if we're more aware of why we feel pressured to buy souvenirs, we can avoid that feeling of overwhelm. So do you have any practical tips for navigating the souvenir minefield?
Well, setting a time limit can be really helpful. Okay, we have 1 hour in this shop and then we're moving on. Another strategy is to divide and conquer. Not everyone needs to be in the same shop looking at the same stuff.
Those are great tips. And maybe instead of feeling like you have to buy something, you could focus on finding something unique, something that really speaks to you, even if it's not a traditional souvenir, like a beautiful seashell from the beach or a vintage postcard from a local shop.
Exactly. The most meaningful souvenirs are the ones with a story, not just something you picked up at the airport.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into group vacations. From pre-trip planning to airport anxiety to choosing activities and even conquering the souvenir shop, we've really explored a lot of different aspects.
And through it all, we've seen how understanding a little bit of the psychology, setting clear expectations, and most importantly, communicating openly can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And that's just the beginning. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll go even deeper into the world of group travel and uncover even more expert strategies for not just surviving, but thriving on your next group adventure. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've talked about, all potential pitfalls and those tricky dynamics that can come up on group vacations. But now I think it's time to shift our focus inward a little bit and talk about how to actually make these trips successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the biggest things people underestimate is the whole expectations thing. Everyone comes into a trip with their own idea of what the perfect vacation looks like.
Right, and if those expectations aren't aligned, it can definitely lead to some conflict.
Absolutely. Remember Kelsey's story about that super detailed itinerary in Italy? That's a classic example of misaligned expectations. But it goes beyond just the schedule. People might have totally different ideas about budgeting or activity levels or even like how much time they want to spend together versus having some alone time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's not just about like planning the what, but also the how and the why of the trip.
Exactly. And that's where, that pre-trip communication becomes so crucial. Instead of just like, throwing out ideas in a group chat, I think it's helpful to have like a dedicated pre-trip meeting, maybe even like a virtual one if everyone's spread out,
Hmm.
and use that time to really discuss not just logistics, but also everyone's like hopes and fears for the trip.
Hmm. I like that.
Like, what are you most excited about? What are you a little bit nervous about?
Yeah, it's like setting the ground rules for communication and conflict resolution before you even leave.
Exactly. And speaking of conflict, let's be real. Disagreements are going to happen. Well, you've got, a group of people with different personalities and preferences,
Hmm.
but there are ways to handle them constructively.
Yeah.
One technique that I often recommend is called active listening.
Active listening.
Yeah, it's about like really hearing and acknowledging the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Hmm, that sounds so simple, but I feel like it can be so hard to do sometimes, especially when you're like stressed or frustrated.
Right. So one helpful tip is to like summarize the other person's point of view before you state your own. So you're not just like waiting for your turn to talk. You're actually trying to understand where they're coming from.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful. It's like taking the heat out of the argument by showing that you're actually listening.
Exactly. Now let's talk about decision making. We touched on this a bit with the restaurant thing, but it comes up constantly on group trips. From deciding what time to leave in the morning to choosing which sites to see, it can feel like a constant negotiation.
Oh, it's so true. And it's easy to fall into the trap of letting one person just make all the decisions, but that can lead to resentment later on.
Exactly. So it's important to have a system for like sharing the decision-making burden.
Mhm.
This could be as simple as like rotating who gets to be the decider each day,
Hmm.
or using a majority rule system for the bigger choices.
I like that idea of like rotating the decision maker. It gives everyone a chance to feel like they have a say in how the trip unfolds.
Right. And it also helps prevent decision fatigue, which is that feeling of being overwhelmed by like too many choices. It's a real thing, and it can definitely impact group dynamics.
Wow, I never realized that decision fatigue plays such a big role in group travel.
Oh, it totally can.
Yeah?
And speaking of things that can impact group dynamics, let's not forget about personal space. When you're spending 24/7 with the same people, even if you love them dearly, it's natural to need a break sometimes.
Totally. It's like you can love your travel buddies to pieces, but still crave a moment of solitude every now and then.
Exactly. And respecting those individual needs for space is crucial. For maintaining a positive group dynamic, it's not about being antisocial. It's about recognizing that everyone recharges differently.
Right. Some people might need an hour alone with a book, while others just need like 5 minutes to meditate or listen to music.
Exactly. And it can actually make the time you do spend together more enjoyable because everyone's coming back feeling refreshed and recharged.
So true. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say. Now let's talk about another potentially touchy subject, money. Group trips often involve shared expenses. And if everyone isn't on the same page financially, it can lead to some awkward moments, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. Money matters can be a major source of stress in group travel. That's why it's so essential to have those open and honest conversations about budgets and spending expectations before you even book the trip.
Right, so it's like setting those financial boundaries up front to avoid any surprises or resentment later on.
Exactly. You might agree to split certain expenses evenly, like accommodation or transportation. While others are handled individually, like meals or souvenirs, there are also some great apps out there specifically designed for tracking shared expenses, which can take a lot of the guesswork and awkwardness out of splitting bills.
Oh, those apps sound like a lifesaver. It's like having a neutral third party to keep track of who owes what.
Right. And speaking of communication, it really is the key to successful group travel. It's about being open and honest about your needs and expectations, listening actively to others, and finding compromises that work for everyone.
It's like communication is the glue that holds the whole group together.
Exactly. And it's not just about talking. It's also about paying attention to those nonverbal cues, like body language and tone of voice. Sometimes just checking in with each other and asking like, hey, how are you feeling about this, can go a long way in preventing misunderstandings and fostering a sense of connection.
That's a really good point. It's about creating a space where everyone feels comfortable expressing themselves and being heard.
Absolutely. And remember, communication isn't just about resolving conflict. It's also about celebrating the wins, big and small. Take the time to acknowledge those moments of joy, connection, and shared accomplishment, whether it's conquering a challenging hike or finding that hidden gem of a restaurant. or simply laughing so hard you cry over a shared inside joke. Those are the moments that make group trips truly special.
I love that it's about consciously focusing on the positive and appreciating those little moments of magic that happen when you're traveling with people you care about.
Exactly, and that brings us to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some more concrete strategies for turning those moments of magic into lasting memories. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really dug into, the potential pitfalls and those kind of tricky dynamics that can pop up on group trips. But now I want to talk about, the fun part. How do we actually make these trips amazing?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about communication and planning, but honestly, I think one of the most important things is having the right mindset.
Okay, what do you mean?
It's about embracing flexibility,
Hmm.
and not just as like a backup plan,
Mm.
but as like a core philosophy of the trip.
So it's not just about being okay with things going wrong, but like actually welcoming those unexpected detours as like opportunities for adventure.
Exactly. Remember Sam and his dad with the lucky socks?
Yeah.
That missed flight could have ruined the whole trip, but they chose to laugh about it, and it
Yeah.
became this like funny story that they still tell. That's the power of flexibility.
I love that. It's like turning those oh moments into what if moments.
Exactly. And this kind of ties into another important strategy, shared responsibility.
Mhm.
We tend to think of like vacation planning as one person's job. But what if we thought about it more like a collaborative project?
So instead of like one person having to make all the decisions, everyone gets to contribute their, strengths and passions.
Right. Like maybe one person is amazing at researching restaurants,
Mhm.
another person's a packing pro, and someone else is really good at finding those like off the beaten path
Yeah.
experiences. By sharing those responsibilities, you not only make it easier on everyone, but you also create this sense of ownership over the trip.
Yeah, I love that. It's like the trip planning itself becomes a bonding experience.
Exactly. Now, even with the best planning and the most flexible mindset, let's be real. There are going to be moments of friction. Spending that much time with anyone, even your best friends, can be a little intense.
That is so true. So how do you deal with those moments when you just need a break from all the togetherness?
I think it's about creating a culture of respecting individual needs. Like, it should be totally normal to say, hey, I need an hour to myself,
Hmm.
whether it's to go for a walk or read a book,
Yeah.
or just put on some headphones and zone out for a bit.
I think a lot of people, especially extroverts, they might feel guilty about wanting that alone time.
Right. But it's not selfish, it's self-care. And like we talked about before, taking care of yourself actually makes you a better travel companion.
Totally. It's like that whole oxygen mask analogy. You got to put on your own mask first before you can help anyone else.
Exactly. And finally, I think one of the most powerful things you can do to make a group trip memorable is to celebrate the wins.
What do you
Like those little moments of joy and connection that happen along the way. Whether it's conquering a tough hike or finding an amazing restaurant or just sharing a good laugh, those are the things that make group trips so special.
I love that. It's about like shifting our focus from what could go wrong to what's actually going right.
Exactly. And by, sharing those moments, expressing gratitude,
Hmm.
acknowledging each other's contributions, it strengthens those bonds and makes the memories last even longer.
Well, I think this deep dive has given us so much to think about, from the, psychology of group travel to practical tips for planning and communication, and even celebrating those little wins along the way.
And ultimately, I hope it inspires you to approach your next group trip with a sense of adventure and excitement and a willingness to embrace the unexpected.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to all our listeners out there, remember to pack your patience, your sense of humor, and most importantly, your adventurous spirit. Until next time, happy travels, everyone.